I had to struggle to survive because that's usually the best way to do it.
How did the family feel about that?
Oh man. Yeah.
Welcome to Wharton Tech Talks, everybody. I'm your host, Ibrahim Bengali. Co-hosting with me today, we've got the wonderful Sakshi Surma. She is our Chief Research Officer here at Wharton Tech Talks. And we are super excited today to welcome the CEO and co-founder of the new professional social media app called Fishbowl, Matt Sumbuli.
Hey, Ibrahim. Nice to be on the show. Appreciate the invite.
Absolutely, man. It's good to reconnect with you. We also go way back. Our families know each other. Our moms know each other extremely well. I know your brother really well. What years were you at Northwestern?
Yeah, so I graduated in 2002. That makes me a little above 40.
And then you left Northwestern, and you've had an interesting, very topsy-turvy career, what it looks like to me. I'd love to get your voice over it. You went into finance, then
Right.
You worked at MTV, then you did a bunch of startups, and now you're at Fishbowl. What was that journey? How did you decide to go from banking to MTV and then starting your own company?
Yeah, totally. I think it comes down to a bit building up the courage to do what you really want to do more than anything else. My first startup experience was during college. Formidable era time. This is around 2099, as you know, like the first boom and bust. And
Right.
I interned for a very interesting startup in downtown Chicago that was re-envisioning packages can be delivered to urban homes. So this startup innovated a pretty interesting model they cribbed from Tokyo, from Japan, which was commonplace there, where they would drop off your package at a local merchant. And they set up a kiosk there. And so there's a bit of a distributed network of merchants where they would make deals. Hey, we'll drop off the packages for kind of the urban residents. And what you get out of it is foot traffic. So pretty interesting, kind of a culturally inspired model. And I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I did a bit of on the ground field work, signing up local merchants, as well as marketing and getting subscribers for their service. Of course, I think it's pretty common to say that it's easy to fall into the herd. And so I found myself I got to get that finance job out of college. I did work for a bank for less than a year, frankly. I have tremendous respect for what they do, but the truth is it just wasn't for me. And that kind of allowed me to build the courage, this is not for me. I need to figure out what I love. I love the internship I did at the startup I just mentioned. And so I put myself in a situation where I had to struggle to survive because that's usually the best way to do it. And so I took whatever little savings I had, I moved to New York and just started hustling there.
How did the family feel about that?
Oh man. Yeah. As you can imagine, for those of you on this podcast, my parents are immigrant parents from Syria and, immigrating into the 70s. So, that's the mentality they're coming from. I love them and they're super supportive, but yeah, they were not fans of that move. I think they would have hoped I would have had a lower risk tolerance or anything like that.
What gave you that risk tolerance, right? I think it resonates with me because as the son of an immigrant family as well, right? And my father's in entrepreneurship, but even just me, that risk tolerance was lower, maybe culturally, or maybe that's just personal, my personality. What empowered you to really want to take those risks? Yeah.
So I think that maybe a little trite to make a quote, a Steve Jobs quote here, but the truth is he has a Stanford commencement address that really, it hit me and inspired me. The day I watched it, I still recall. And, the quote was basically, remembering that you're going to die is probably the best way, or he was speaking on himself, best way I know to avoid the trap of thinking you have something to lose. And so it's just this reminder of death and its inevitability, like how morbid, but it's incredibly powerful. It really is. And I'm just like, wow, this really hit home with me. I think the other part of it is, it's not that necessarily founders or entrepreneurs have greater risk tolerance. I think part of it is that they have greater reward appetites. They're just hungrier. In my experience with mentors and advisors who've been entrepreneurs, the best founders and entrepreneurs are actually acutely aware of the risks and factors that are at play with the decision they're making, but they just get so much more utility in trying to reach that summit, and they see that reward as being so much greater, and that's what drives them. Whereas the story of the kind of the reckless entrepreneur, one times out of 100 that one might hit, But the vast majority of the successful ones are relentless.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's I'm curious what your insight is as to, I mean, so many people on your platform are consultants, right?
Right.
And I think a lot of them feel stuck in that. What are some interesting insights that you've pulled out, being kind of the highest level view of this platform, of like, what are the types of personalities and behaviors behind people in these really professional services places?
That's a whole nother discussion. It really is fascinating. There's a sociological part of Fishbowl that, frankly, when I started, I hadn't anticipated. And some of it is kind of stereotypical, but some of it isn't. The truth is, we see that our accountants are very transactional in the way they use the network. A lot of questions and answers. They're not social. I'm not saying that there aren't social accountants out there. Right? I'm sure there are. Yeah, I'm sure there are. My account is fairly social, but in the creative advertising space, there's extreme pride in your personal function of what you do. And so, as you know, on Fishbowl, you can post what we call with verified anonymity. You verify who you are. So you can post with your title, I'm an art director, or I'm a creative director, or you can post with your company. And it was fascinating to find that in the business world consulting, 80% of users would lead with their company. In the advertising space, no matter how acclaimed the agency was, no, they were posting with creative director. And these are the nuances, they're like psychological nuances and differences that you come to appreciate. You design around it a bit too, but you really come to appreciate it.
Have you seen a spike in COVID?
Yeah, we have. Absolutely. Yeah, on both sides. So the easiest way to understand it is, what we saw in consulting because of that quarantine environment has now effectively, you've gone from a steady state of maybe 30% of knowledge professionals being distributed or remote before pre-COVID, post-COVID, 70%. I mean, depending on the firm, 100.
Yeah.
And so if you're a professional and you're isolated and you're quarantined and you don't have access to the ability to go network and have a coffee chat with someone, or you don't have access to the hallway in your company building, where do you go for this chatter? Where's your gathering point? Where's your water cooler? Where's the cafeteria? And so what we found is that both networks on Fishbowl, the company networks, where it's a channel of essentially other coworkers and employees, lit up because they're disconnected, they're decentralized, and they're looking to be centralized. And then also the industry networks, to a degree, lit up as well, depending on which, because the professionals that would normally go to a conference to try to get a referral, they're actually they're asking for referrals on Fishbowl, and so we definitely saw a surge in both engagement and adoption.
But so you weren't a consultant, right? So like, where did this idea come from? Was it a problem that you were trying to solve, or was it just I see this opportunity and I see the money in the headlights, so I'm going to chase after it? Like, how did that come about?
I guess some of it was purposefully driven, where I was thinking through a problem statement. But honestly, some of it was just my background. So, back to the question of like where you jumped around. I entered MTV at a time, I think 2004, 2005, where the media properties, these traditional media conglomerates, were just trying to figure out, how do we distribute our content in a more scalable fashion online? And so a lot of the stuff they were doing was obvious, but like, we're innovating. We're going to take our library, analog content and put it digitally, so you can access, the music, and you can access, the licensed property online. And then just as they started pouring tens of millions of dollars into this, including, whether you're MTV.com or you're whatever type of media property, here comes UGC, right? Here comes the YouTubes of the world, and then social media as well. Here comes the Facebook world. And, within a year or two, all the eyeballs are on YouTube. And all the content is on YouTube as well. That part was hilarious to us. And and it's like, well, what are we doing? Like, why are we pouring? And, as a product manager at the time, I was like, what am I doing? Like, what I saw was, and I think anybody now, it's easy in retrospect too, is these platforms, whether any user-generated use case or social media, they were going to usurp, traditional media. And if I was going to stick around MTV and Viacom, I was wasting my time, frankly. And so as a result, I did start digging a bit more into these platforms, seeing like, okay, any room for innovation here. And, Facebook at the time had just launched a third-party publishing application developer platform. People actually don't know this. Prior to Apple's, third-party app program, Facebook actually had the first, and it was really innovative. A lot of the apps were, maybe this is a little predates, but there were silly games and Scrabulous. You play Scrabble with friends and all this stuff. They went viral, and
Right.
so I started moonlighting with developers. I found a few developers online, befriended them, and we started just banging on project applications, building on Facebook, different types of silly applications, and slowly one thing led to another. I found one developer I just hit it off with, and we started a company called Social Amp. That was my first startup. But yeah, what led to that was basically where I was, kind of seeing the signals on the wall, and I guess in some manner maybe minimizing risk tolerance. I guess, to be fair, moonlighting on an app while you're still getting paid a day job is one way to do it. I should say, before I left MTV, in that new company we had started, we actually managed to do, I think, 2 sales worth a decent sum of money, where I was like, oh, I can leave and still pay rent, New York rent, which was helpful. But yeah, that was the beginning of it.
Talk to me about the breadth of, like, I mean, for the listeners, it'd be great to just get the founder story and, like, where did the idea come from? But I would love for you to kind of build towards, like, this. You talked about accountants, you've talked about advertising, you've talked about consultants, and you have, like, teachers and law. Like, how do you choose who gets to be on this platform and why?
The truth is that in the desire to grow our audience base, and the question is, where do you start, right? And I still recall when we first had the idea for Fishbowl, fair statements like, do we really need another professional social media site? Or so do we really need another network? I mean, there's enough of this, aren't there better ideas out there? We got tons of that. And, frankly, it took a lot, I thought about that a lot before we continued hustling and building it out. But I'll get back to the value prop in a second, because there's some value props that convinced me that, yeah, this is a worthwhile endeavor. Mm-hmm. We're not just sinking time into another social media, chasm chat. That doesn't help. It doesn't progress anything. But yeah, the verticalization came about. Well, okay, given the value props, how do we go about introducing this space, this tool, this medium to professionals? And we were like, well, we gotta segment this. We gotta slice it. There's multiple dimensions, but 2 primary dimensions. There's one, industry where it's a loose affiliation of a company's social graph of sorts. So depending upon the company you work for, that may be just discreetly associated with the industry. Sometimes it's not, right? Mm-hmm. There are companies that represent a number of functions. But the concept of industry and a company's affiliation or association or classification to industry was fairly strong. So that was one kind of learning point. The second learning point was that there are functions too. That's the second dimension. So what you do, right? So now, even within a consulting firm, 80% may be consultants, but you have the operations and you have different functions. And so the easiest way to launch was to focus on this very discrete pillar, industries and kind of companies associated with industries. And then from there, we actually designed it for more socially, like which cohort we thought would take to this the fastest, or the quickest, I should say. And with consultants, and this is very interesting, particularly given the quarantine time we find in ourselves now, consultants travel all the time. They're effectively quarantined in their hotels.
Ain't that the truth?
They're lonely. They're really lonely, and that emerged in the data. Like when we did some small tests with different feeds, different industries. Like, wow, consultants is like lighting up, because they have a lot of time. They're lonely, and they're social people without the other human, stuck in their hotel. So in that case, we launched the consulting first, based on kind of the psychological finding we found that they tend to be social and they're in a remote quarantine condition. As far as the vertical since then, I think that was your question. At that point, similar principles come into play. Well, which other industries exhibit these type of characteristics of social and psychological characteristics, professional? But there's also other factors at play, like adjacency, word of mouth, right? So word of mouth is the number one driver. You can build a marketing engine, but no matter what type of marketing engine you build, the truth is the most viral products are self-viral. There's word of mouth.
I think in another podcast you mentioned 60% of your users are from word of mouth.
Absolutely, until this day. And so from that perspective, the consulting word of mouth was being transferred to kind of sister industries, right? So accounting, a lot of the same firms have divisions. So the Big Four, for example, Ernst & Young, and they have consulting arms, they have accounting arms. And so we found a lot of accountants signing up as a result of that. And so it was kind of a no-brainer. Let's go there. And then, back to the social design principles. Yeah, we found marketers and advertisers. They also exhibited socialness in a different way, though. A lot of it was more, personal brand focused, but they took to this type of network. So that's how we made some of the other decisions. I think the one you mentioned was teachers. The truth is, we're always interested in pushing the envelope at Fishbowl. So we know we have a use case for knowledge professionals. It's clear. And every vertical we launch, we've launched into law, and we're getting really deep into law right now. A very traditional, classic, use case for knowledge professionals. We wanted to prove that this can work, outside of just that knowledge professional LinkedIn type. There's not many teachers on LinkedIn.
Right.
And that's why we launched the teachers, and it's been fascinating to watch, right? It continues to grow. We've obviously been, aided and abetted by the quarantine and the remote teaching environment now, where they're coming to Fishbowl complaining about, teaching students from their homes and fielding phone calls at, 9 p.m. dinner time from parents, or, it's a whole different set of.
So you talked about the eyeball nature, right? Back in the MTV days, but think about today. We've got TikTok, we've got Reels. If I think about Fishbowl and who its competitive marketplace is, I think that's a really hard question to answer. But I think it's like you have the LinkedIns of the world, you have the Glassdoors of the world, but then you also just have like eyeball competition, right? I feel like on the phone. Like when I go on my phone, I'll admit it, the first thing I go to is Instagram and Reels and then texts. So who do you see as your competitors, and how are you positioning against them? Like both in the social media landscape, specifically the professional landscape, but then also just like eyeballs.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. There's no easy answer to it. People forget Amazon started off as a vertical bookseller, right? That was his. Bezos always knew what it was going to be, and he picked investors on what it was going to be. But the truth is, as a consumer at that time, 99, 2000, it was books. That was it. and then when he's like, oh, it got to DVDs. Okay, yeah, DVDs make sense. That's one thing. I still remember the moment he started getting into, other products, right, that were like kitchenware, and people like laughing, like, what are you doing? And they had a bit of a struggle in the public market at the time, but obviously he is where he is now. And so, but he knew where he was going, but he was very strategically. And so the simple answer is like where we currently are in our product positioning is one place, and where we see ourselves it may be different. And so where we currently see ourselves is we're definitely kind of wedging out a space right now where a primary use case for Fishbowl is to come in and you're socializing a bit, but the truth is 70% of the content on Fishbowl is questions. In our company bowls, it's 80% in our company network, company channels. Right. And so you're going to Fishbowl to transact information. You're not transacting like you do on Quora, right? You're not asking some question and getting, the answer is, it's like the best ad tech tool is. You're transacting by asking a question, and you're getting a person sharing like a very first person testimonial point of view on like how I dealt with working for LEK or transitioning from being a lawyer to whatever job you're going through, and it's more empathetic, it's more personal.
Right, even with senior partners too, like jumping in and talking about these things.
Exactly, partners and these these users, older users who've been in your shoes, and now they can afford the time because they've done well for themselves to give back a bit on Fishbowl, and honestly that's really important to the time at the Fishbowl. And so from that vantage point, where we currently see ourselves is we have a very high transaction around consuming information, valuable information about companies, culture, jobs. And in that sense, there's a bit of an overlap with the Glassdoor type of network, right? And in consuming that information. On the other side, though, we have the type of engagement on Fishbowl is more akin to traditional social media, to like a Facebook and a LinkedIn. Both in terms of the way you interact. On Glassdoor, you're going and sharing a review. And the fact that you're calling it a review, like that's not traditional social media in terms of real time and whatnot. Right. On Fishbowl, you're actually engaging in a conversation, right? And a long threaded conversation. And so we actually kind of see ourselves where we're on one hand, this use case of consuming information about companies and research in an authentic way is a bit of a Glassdoor. That's a one polar end. On the other polar end is using a professional network in a more engaged way, where companies leadership comes in and answers questions. That's a use case of LinkedIn. So when we think of LinkedIn, we think of network identity, and we think of leaders engaging it, and that's what they have good. They don't have authentic conversation. It's all self-promotion. And so we've kind of wedged this space now right in between, smack dab in the middle,
Right.
where users come to our network because it's authentic, first person driven, and it's like it's where you can get the real information on companies from a first person point of view. And the reason you can get it is because the companies engage it. That's really important, and people don't realize that. We have CEOs in our advertising industry who go in there and they are, they're posting pseudonymously in this case, with their CEO title. Sometimes they'll actually post with their identity too. And the fact that they're there is what makes Fishbowl tick, right?
Okay.
If you're a manager or you're a director level and you ask a question and you're not getting an answer, you're not coming back to Fishbowl.
Right.
If you're getting an answer from that partner, from that CEO, that C-suite, you're coming back. And that's really what makes Fishbowl work. It's because we got the leadership engagement and the user trust, authenticity.
Right. How do you then, are you planning on deeper integrating with these companies? Like, is there a now enterprise side of Fishbowl that you launched to the HR folks at whatever, McKinsey or Kirkland?
So as far as kind of that model, employee engagement, we're really trying to develop the framework first, meaning, we're going out of our way in speaking with these companies and saying, hey, look, this is the correct way to look at Fishbowl. Because it's fascinating. We'll come into a company and we'll say, hey, by the way, we have 30% of your MDs communicating on this platform. Like, what? We thought Fishbowl was just this place of, Gen Zers and whatnot. And that's actually nothing could be further from the truth. You look at Fishbowl's data, 30%, I think it's 30% above the age of 35, 20% above the age of 40. We distribute pretty much as the firm distributes. And
Interesting.
When we've spoken with our older cohort users, we get them on the phone calls, try to understand why I use Fishbowl. They're like, because you classify me correctly and you put me in a room with someone based upon who I am. We have partner-only discussion forums where you're a verified partner on Fishbowl. The fact that's really helpful, it's relevant, but then I don't have to put my name on the line, right?
Right.
Because you have a lot to lose at that level, right? At that level, you have more to lose. And so your value prop for Fishbowl is even more valuable in some ways if you want to talk and communicate than the analyst who, the analyst needs to learn more, but they have less to lose, right? And so that dynamic exists. And so we're focused on just really training companies at this point and introducing this framework. Like, look, you need to look at Fishbowl this way. Yeah. And you've probably seen this if you're a user on Fishbowl. You'll see Q&As we've done now with everything from we've done a recent one with a former CEO of Dunkin' Donuts, Bob Rosenberg, was on. In our finance industry, we did one with Curtis Johnson, who's a managing director of the Carlyle Group, one of the most prestigious private equity firms. And this comes from kind of our desire to teach them that framework. From a monetization standpoint, I'll tell you where the short term we have prior to COVID, at least, it was focused more on recruitment. It's an obvious recruitment market as you scale there. But employee engagement really focused on the training and education.
Interesting.
Matt, there's also a very interesting dynamic where people seem to be sharing more and revealing less. And then how do you think Fishbowl actually encourages more of a trustworthy environment where people are able to ask the questions that they otherwise probably wouldn't in person?
Fishbowl, when you sign up for Fishbowl, you are verifying where you work, typically with a work email address. You're actually sharing a good amount of information about yourself. Your title, your age, your gender. We have a percentage of our users sharing their contact book so we can connect them. So there's a lot of traditional trappings of a professional network in that regard. But once you share that, the reason why you do it and the reason why users are willing to do it is we use that data to group you properly first, which is something seems really simple, but you don't see on traditional networks like LinkedIn, right? Like you go in these social media groups, it's 2 million people in social media, and you have like a junior intern with like the CEO. It's like, how the hell are they gonna have a conversation there, right?
Right.
And so one secret area or recipe is you take that user, you segment them properly. But then the other part is accountability. So that now the user knows, okay, you actually know who I am, and now I get to post pseudonymously with my company identifier. And in that regard, we're actually more you could argue even potentially less anonymous than a Twitter, right? People don't realize on Twitter, the reason why you have such prolific trolls living on that network and these other networks is because anybody can spin up an account, right? They're called burner accounts. I guess that's the term these days. You spin up an account and you create a pseudo anonymous name, right? You're essentially anonymous. On Fishbowl, you can't do that. You actually got to verify who you are, and then you get to post pseudo anonymously. So there's more accountability in that type of way than traditional networks. And our users are smart. They actually get that. So what we've hit on is just enough accountability to hopefully, and we're working on this, prevent too much trolling, but also enough comfort where you can post that question that you otherwise wouldn't post because it's not being tied to your name, your personal brand, which these days is like, and I think it's the downfall of social media personally, like the fact that personal brand has become the end all, right? I'm a fan of personal brand. I post on LinkedIn, right? I'm trying to get my whatever like count up, get my network up. But when it becomes the end all, like that's, I'm not a fan of that. And I think Fishbowl pushes back against that a bit, honestly.
How do you then think about, free speech and privacy and trolls and community guidelines? They're all in the news nonstop today, right? Especially at the Twitters and the Facebooks of the world. What is your philosophy around that? Or do you just not have to deal with it as much? And so is it less? How do you think about that question?
Yeah, well, so first off, you have to have a philosophy around that these days, or you'll be chased out by a number of actors, both increasingly the users themselves, internet users, humans, Americans are asking platforms like Twitter to become more accountable. And so they'll chase you out if you don't have guidelines. But yeah, so I think what we did early on is, and we're still working on it, every social media platform we're working on, we're nowhere near the size of Facebook or Twitter, but we're still a social media platform. And the truth is, our users at our size do punch above their weight, right? So just give some perspective, 30 to 35% of our users create content, actual content on Facebook. That's the traditional social media site will see 5, 10.
Oh, so that's much higher. Okay.
Yeah, and so we eclipsed 10 million posts and comments like a long time ago. And so there's a lot of content we actually got to manage on Fishbowl, even though we're not at the scale of the Facebook. That's one thing to keep in mind. The other thing to keep in mind is, our content, our average character count of a comment or post on Fishbowl is around 275 characters. We have thoughtful users sharing, English language structured sentences. Nothing against emojis and this other kind of shorthand form. There's a use case for that, but that use case is not on Fishbowl. The truth is, these are elaborate conversations. The reason I'm only mentioning that is it adds to the moderation mode on our side, even at a small size. And we have to be more thoughtful earlier than I think other networks have because of this volume of content and the length of content we have. So from the get-go, we have guidelines out there, and we got pushback from our user, but we hold the line where, it's not just your traditional trolling. Hey, if you're excessively negative, right? Then you're defeating the purpose of this forum, right? And so here's an example, and in our education with companies, and this part of the way we educate them, it's like what we consider to be excessively negative without sense of construct is, this is a terrible place, period. There's absolutely no context to why. There's no, and we moderate those conversations out. We will quarantine those, and we're unabashed by it because I think people want to hear the good, the bad, and the ugly, but tell me why. Don't just tell me this place sucks. Right?
Do you get pushback then from well, it's freedom of speech, I want to give my, and how do you deal with it? Or you're just, this is the stance we're taking, and if you like us, you like us, and if you don't, you don't?
Look, the short answer is we have 2 or 3 Reddit groups right now of banned Fishbowl users who these are users who are accustomed to the rules of the game of engagement on traditional networks like Reddit and others. And nothing against Reddit. My understanding, actually, Reddit is trying to clean up its act, and kudos to them, and I hope they keep on doing that. But they are used to those rules of engagement. Fishbowl being still a professional network, a professional platform, it's about being constructive. If you're going to come in and you're sharing a post and you have, it's a bit of a privilege. I'm not saying like, oh, wow, this is amazing. But if you're sharing a post and that post could be read because, we're not your traditional social graph where your post is read by your 300 nodes who are connected.
Right.
It could be read by CEOs from different industries. Then you got to respect their attention too, right? And you got to respect the audience in this case. And so when you publish that, we have a higher bar. Users know this too. We have limits on publishing. So if you try to post more than 2 hours, more than 2 times in a 4-hour period in a certain feed, we have different range limits that it's a bit, it learns a day, it changes. You might say come back. Right? That's unheard of in social media. Like I can't say, and it's not about stifling speech. It's about what's best for the community. And I think this is what traditional platform went wrong is you should be honing in on what's best for everyone in the community. And sometimes what's best for the individual isn't what's best for the community.
Oh man, that's like an American conversation, like in a whole, that permeates everything. That permeates healthcare, that permeates discussion of like, do you prioritize the community or do you prioritize the individual? And so for you, you're prioritizing the community as opposed to necessarily the individual. How did you come up with this philosophy and these guidelines? Did you consult with people? Was this mostly you? Like, where did that come from? I
think partially, and it's only fair to say, there's been a lot of minefields that we've been able to avoid because of history and how others have failed. You never want to oversimplify, but particularly in this space that we're operating on, social media, and even in the, if you want to call it the anonymity space, we touched that a bit, there's a lot of cautionary tales, and we studied those. We're like, what did they do wrong? What did they do right? And so
Right.
to be fair, I think just being aware of those cases, and this is where access to some of those founders and the work in the Silicon Valley helped. We learned what they did wrong, what they did right. But it's okay to pat yourself on the back a bit. I'll say this: it was important enough to us, though, to prioritize. And I think that's what I don't think we give myself credit or give my team credit for saying, hey, we did this, how innovative. No, I mean it's the fact that we prioritize, and I'm proud of that. I am proud of that, and I think it's necessary. And I do truly believe the typical human being these days, this is what they desire. Things have run amok on social media, and you're seeing it now. I mean, this is not novel.
I mean, I remember you and I had like a user story conversation, and at that time, Fishbowl was like relatively simple. It was consulting, kind of a one big bowl essentially for consulting and one big bowl for something else at that time.
Right.
And now you have so many things happening at once. You've got job stuff that you've introduced. You've got networking stuff. You've got, I don't know how many different bowls.
Yeah.
And as you're going from like that initial starting point of something very simple to that broader vision that you talked about with like that Bezos had, right? And that you have for your company.
Yeah.
How are you evaluating the trade-offs of like what's being too much? Like, am I adding too much to the app? Is it overwhelming people? Is it reducing the organic content? And is it like overwhelming is the word that I keep coming back to? How do you think about that?
Two considerations we'll always navigate by. One is, what is the actual desired end state here that the founders have? And I don't mean to say that like this is a dictatorial vision. What I mean to say is that, when you launch something, you do have something in mind. And you do think that's the end state. You think that's the inevitable state. And so you navigating towards that end state, inevitable state, is less about pride. It's more about the belief that if I don't reach that end state, that inevitable state, the product is going to fail. Maybe it's thriving now, but like it's going to fail 3 years if I don't do it. And you're just ahead of the game. You see ahead of the game. And so that's one consideration that's really important, where we'll launch new features and users will be like, this is why? I'll give you an example of that, real quick. I know we're running out of time, but we have a use case of users who actually want to meet others. We've had, every network has this, but we've had dozens of users get married off Fishbowl. Like there's a lot of social.
Are you serious?
Yeah, absolutely. And we get emails.
No way. I didn't think about that.
And look, every social media app that has a bit of this, users, we do have a use case for users designing networking features. And so we make sure that we do believe the end state of Fishbowl will cater to both use cases to be able to ask questions safely. But for those of you who want to network with professionals, there's a better way to do it than spamming the in-mail channel on LinkedIn.
100%.
And we're driving towards that vision of it. But then the analytics is the second part of that. What are users telling you, right? So you can only go so far. If they come in and clamor like hell no, or the data's like this is absolutely terrible, that's going to inform the decision too.
Interesting. Can you share what this end all be all vision is?
When we look at Fishbowl, in the most basic sense, we really feel that there's this taboo that professionals, and it's partially American professionals, but we think globally, like human beings in their professional skin, it's not that they just censor themselves, they just speak inauthentically. Yeah. And the cost to that is what's important here. So it's not that, well, they speak inauthentically, that sucks, so what, move on. No, the cost to speaking inauthentically to professional means all this knowledge share, all these questions, all this good that come out of it doesn't happen. And the perfect use case, look at LinkedIn, 300 million users. I go into that feed, nothing against what Rita has built, and it's a great network for what it does. But what a shame to look in this feed and to see like white paper after white paper, self-promotion, newspaper article. It's like why are you not sharing information? Like why are you not asking questions? Why? And I get why, it's a psychological reason, and we're trying to architect around that. So if we can design a product that solves that, we actually think there's a lot of good that can come out of it.
And as you grow to that vision, what lessons are you taking from the Twitter and the Facebooks of milestones to avoid around engagement and community and developing that, just because of the scale of where they're at now and how that's changed from when they were small? What are the lessons we're taking?
The most important product lesson we're taking from just a usage standpoint is scale with relevance. Anybody who's built a consumer app or platform and has raised some money from the Valley for it actually knows the pressure they get to grow in an unbridled fashion. And one of the reasons why, frankly, if you use Twitter and you feel that like it loses meaning for you and relevance as you just follow accounts without any structure, it's because when it started, all they wanted you to do was connect with as many nodes as possible, to grow as fast as possible. That was the mandate. That's what your investors are demanding. And so if you're going to change the model a bit now. You can't just do the same because people stop using you. You know, at a fraction of the size of a Twitter, people will ditch your product. So the challenge for Fishbowl is like, okay, we've done something really unique at this size. Can we continue scaling with the same level of relevance? That's incredibly important for us. So that's one thing. And then the other one, obvious one, is content, and moderation.
Okay.
There's a really interesting, you know, Social Dilemma is out right now and everybody's watching it. But if you want a more thoughtful take on that, you know, the custodians of the internet. He's a principal researcher for Microsoft and a comms guy at Columbia. And he talks about, in a far more elaborate, thoughtful way, you know, the costs of content moderation and the irony actually of how you essentially have, you know, Americans being babysat by, you know, moderators in different parts of the world, right? Fishbowl, we have moderators from India, female stay-at-home working moms with PhDs, and they're moderating the American audience, right? You know, it's ironic and funny and sad to a degree too. But so that's the second lesson is like, you know, particularly with the amount of content we create, we need to be incredibly careful to make sure the discussion remains civil, remains constructive, and unlock some of the value, you know, that was mentioned earlier.
I think that's a really beautiful and refreshing take on social media that I think we maybe often don't hear. And I'm not throwing shade at any company in any way, but the idea of you know, institutionally putting in this idea of civility and moderation and conversation, and which may be, you know, enhanced by the maybe audience or the nature of the folks that are having these conversations and the anonymity pieces that you've included in the design that you've done from a product level. But I know we're coming up on time. I want to continue this conversation. Unfortunately, we are running up on time, but I want to ask you our closing question, which is, what is your boldest, most interesting, unique prediction of how the world's going to be different 5 to 8 years from now? Like what you believe in your heart's going to happen, even though you know it's a total moonshot?
Right. Okay. Wow. That's, yeah. So I always feel investors are the best to answer this question because they see so many ideas and they have the ability to digest those ideas and then pontificate in a way that I'm still very much in the middle of the race. But I guess I'll answer it this way. So for me, I think where I'm operating within the social media communication space, I do see two things. So first off is, you know, government's role, and I don't say this in a positive way, but I do see a continuing encroachment from governments on social media, just and communication platforms because of their incredible power, frankly, and potential to frame messages. And so we've already seen this historically from a data access and control standpoint, right? We've all seen the Edward Snowden and the prison projects, and we know there was and probably still is backdoors from a data access. And I think it's only intuitive to think that the next step of that is it's not enough just to be able to access that data, but can we actually control or at least heavily inform the message? And so what we're seeing right now in the election cycle is a more rogue version of that, where, you know, our politicians are using private platforms for purpose. But I think government will continue encroaching on social media just because so that's one thing. But I think on the positive side, though, I think there's tremendous potential. And I'm a really big believer in that. The ability of social media platforms to use the channel as to steward the electorate in a more productive way. Meaning, I actually think we haven't even begun to see how social media can go beyond the grassroots and can be used and utilized in a more structural way to support civic democracy. You know, if you think about how CEOs at companies operate and funnel sentiment and surveys of their people, and it's real time, and there's and the science. You know, why can you not do that on a scale of local or national government? I think that's inevitable, and I think you're going to see that. And I think you'll probably see it within an 8-year horizon, I would say.
That's a really very, very different take than I think what we think of when we think social media and politics.
Right. I know.
One final question I have. You say encroachment, right? Like you say encroachment of the government. Do you feel that it's actually an encroachment, or would you prefer that the government steps in and tells you what the rules of the game are?
I think you want the government to inform the discussion and inform the policy, you know, but I think the concern, and maybe the rightful concern, is the hand overplayed. You know, particularly government being government, it has the capacity to do that, and in an unintentional way, maybe even with different regimes, they might unintentionally stifle some of the communication, the unbridled kind of like speech that you see. That's a lot of good, sometimes bad as well. It can be killed. Honestly, it can be stifled. And so I think the concern there is, does the government overplay its hand? I think everybody wants government to play a role, certainly, and I think it should. but how much of a role, right? And is it informing policy or is it making policy? I think is the difference.
It's going to be fun to see how that plays out over the next 5 to 8 years. Matt, Habib, it's really good to have you here. It's really good to catch up with you. Thank you for joining us, and we appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.